Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's lecture. My name is Katie Fleming. I'm a staff member at the Phoebe A. Hearst Museum of Anthropology at UC Berkeley. And I'm thrilled to welcome you to today's lecture with Professor Diliana Angelova. Good morning, Diliana. How are you?
Hi, Katie. Good morning.
So before we get started, I'd like to share a couple of statements. As you may have noticed, we started today's event a few minutes late. At 11 a.m., we stood with Chancellor Carol Christ of UC Berkeley and the statewide UC Academic Senate in honoring the memory of George Floyd and other victims of police murder and brutality by observing a minute of silence and reflection. The Chancellor stated in a message to the UC Berkeley community this morning that as an institution of higher learning, it is our role and responsibility to examine and teach about the critical, challenging, and at times thorny issues facing our society. So we thank you for standing with us in solidarity and for your patience in us getting started with this talk. In addition, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that Berkeley sits on the territory of Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Here at the Hearst, we're working to recognize and grapple with our own specific origins and role within the university. Even before we existed as a museum, our collections began with projects that participated in and were made possible by campaigns of genocide waged against Native Californian people, ancestors whose descendants are still here alive with us today. And as a museum, we want to offer an apology by working toward different relationships in the present and future, which will affirm Indigenous sovereignty and hold ourselves accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples. We want to offer an apology by transforming the museum into a site for justice, inclusion, anti-racist action, and Indigenous knowledge production. So thank you all for joining me in solidarity with that statement and with today's moment of silence. I also wanted to let you know a little bit of the logistics around today's meeting. As you may have noticed, we don't have closed captioning available for this talk in real time. So if this is something that you need for accessibility of this talk, it will be available at a later date with closed captioning, and we'll be in communication with you about the availability of that. Also, you will have noticed that your audio and video are muted today. That being said, we welcome you to contribute questions to Professor Diliana Angelova in the chat and to us. So feel free to send those throughout the course of the talk, and we'll address as many as possible at the later part of today's lecture. And so today I'm honored to welcome Professor Diliana Angelova, Associate Professor at UC Berkeley and historian of late antique and Byzantine art and visual culture. She is the author of Sacred Founders, Women, Men, and Gods in the Discourse of Imperial Founding, Rome through Early Byzantium. Thank you so much for being here today, Diliana.
Thank you, Katie. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing your presentation and thanking again our guests for being here today and enjoying this presentation.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you all very much for coming. I need just a moment to adjust myself here. Yes, we have to start from the beginning.
Sorry, I don't know how that happened. Let's start again. Are you able to see the shared screen now?
I see the shared screen. I would like to minimize it, however.
If you press escape, you should be able to keep this, still be able to see it, but not have it take up your whole screen.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So again, good morning, and thank you very much, Katie and Jessica, for helping me with this talk. Thank you also for the invitation. To all of you who are attending, thank you for coming, and thank you for observing a moment of silence in memory of George Floyd and other victims of racist killings in this country. I hope to lift your spirits up a little bit with this talk, which is a bit on the frivolous side, considering our current situation. But I do think we need merriment in life as well as attending to more serious matters. So this talk is about the captivating power of Eros, the god of love, and Dionysus, the god of wine and merrymaking, centuries after the Roman Empire became Christian. My entryway into the subject are images on textiles produced roughly between the 300s and the 600s in the Eastern Mediterranean. Most of these fabrics have been looted in the 19th century from burial grounds in Egypt. And in this map, you can see in bold, in red dots, some of the sites from which they came. I argue that although late antique people were increasingly Christian in late antiquity, they could imagine the good life only in a overwhelmingly pagan framework. So in the first part of this talk, I discuss some basics about the decoration of late antique textiles. And in the second, I focus on how images of Eros, Dionysus, and their companions help express late antique ideas about love and living well. Let us now consider the variety of textiles production with an eye to articulating overall themes. I present this famous wall mosaic from the Church of San Vitale in Ravenna, Italy, as a window into types of textiles and decorative motifs. The mosaic was completed shortly after 548 of the Common Era and depicts the court of the Empress Theodora, the wife of Justinian. All presented here were Christian. The figures are represented in luxurious interior, a church or the palace. Along with prized marble revetments and bejeweled columns, there are two textiles: a curtain to the left in front of the fountain, and a tapestry to the right. Tapestries, curtains, bedspreads, and pillows were found in most homes. However, most of the cloth manufactured in the years 300 to 600 was used to fashion clothing. Men and women wore tunics, shorter for the men, longer for women. The tunics, usually made of linen or decorated with clavi, or long strips, and inserts, oval, rectangular, hexagonal, all of which are represented here in this image. The most common types of weaving are tabby and tapestry weave. Tabby weave was used for linen fabrics and tapestry weave for textiles decorated with images. In tabby weave, to your right, weft threads pass over and under the warp. The overall effect from a close-up perspective is of a wedge-like design, leaving visible both the weft and the warp. In tapestry weave, the warp threads are covered by the weft, allowing to create images of decorative patterns. What you see here is a close-up of a child's tunic in the Hearst Museum. Other types of clothing include shawls. Notice that the women in this picture wear them. Cloaks, the two men and the empress wear cloaks. Capes, mantles, head nets, and other head coverings, socks, trousers, and slippers. Most outer garments were woven in wool. The heavy cloaks of the two men to the right may have been made out of wood. It is also possible that, like the purple chlamys, or cloak of the empress, they were tailored out of luxurious silk, which may have even been produced in Constantinople. Elite consumers, next slide, please, such as the imperial family and the court, had gold and silver threads woven in their garments. Notice the border of the empress's tunic, the three magi represented on her cloak, the clavi on the woman to her right, and the shawl of the woman next to her. Overall, the function of images on late antique textile was first to adorn by conveying certain ideas about the wearer, such as beauty, fecundity, good fortune, and wealth. Second, to protect from demons, envy, the evil eye by means of crosses, knots, and other apotropaic symbols. To see how adornment and protection worked in practice, I present two fragments of a tunic to the left and a complete tunic unfolded to the right. In the next slide, I've paired these textiles with examples of actual jewelry from about the same period. Textile designs in all three cases imitate jewelry and are meant to adorn and protect the body of the wearer. Both men and women, next slide please, wore garments decorated with images, human and animal figures, and vegetal and geometric designs. In this close-up, notice the three magi on the empress's cloak again, the floral designs, and the bird motifs on the women's dresses and shawls. Bishop Asterius of Amasya, who died in the early 5th century, criticized the woven fabrics worn by his flock. He was incensed that, I quote, lions and leopards, bears, bulls and dogs, forests and rocks, hunters, and in short, the whole repertory of painting that imitates nature found place on the clothing of Christians. He was outraged that rich Christians had even, I quote, picked out the story of the Gospels and handed it to weavers, end of quote, who had embellished their garments with miracles of Christ. The head-to-toe coverage with figural designs can be demonstrated with this leaf of an ivory diptych. This is a writing implement, possibly representing the 5th century Roman general Stilicho. The general's tunic and his military cloak or chlamys were cut from the same fabric. Its pattern consists of a lattice of roundels. A face peeks from each circle. Even the general's leggings are adorned. An orbiculus, or a round patch with a geometric design, decorates his lower left leg. The design of the general's cloak can be compared with a fragment of a 4th century silk tapestry to the right. It features a similar lattice of roundels. The putu to the left holds a basket with fruits, the one to the right a bunny. The faces of the ivory diptych fabric are illegible, but could be understood as representing either the seasons, personifications, or even coins with imperial portraits. To give you the feel of how late antique clothing looked on an actual human, I model here a reconstructed tunic, tapestry weave, from the collection of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. The fabric is luxuriously heavy, or was when I tried it on, and though bulky, surprisingly supple, roomy, and very comfortable. With these brief remarks, I conclude the introductory part of my presentation and turn now to Eros and Dionysus, beginning with Eros, the god of love, the naughty child of Aphrodite, the goddess of love. On late antique textiles, the mischievous god turns up in various places. We find him and his siblings, the Cupids, on both personal clothing and fabrics that decorate the home. Eros and the little loves populate scenes of natural abundance on land and sea. In this example of a border, winged putti hold a shield with the image of a personification. Multiple birds, including a parrot to the left and a profusion of flowers, are the putti's playground. The flowers and the verdant wreath on the personification's head allude to vernal bloom. Cupids likewise preside over marine abundance and of merriment. In the silk from the Abegg collection in Bern and Switzerland, winged putti row boats ride hippopotamuses, hold garlands, while flamingos and seahorses frolic around. Putti are found on the clothes of both men and women. A speech of praise for the general Stilicho from the year 405 describes Stilicho's cloak as, I quote, heavy with gold. The cloak itself served as a canvas on which the weaver joined together scenes showing the birth and military training of the general's grandson, as well as nymphs and Venus in a dove-drawn chariot and winged cupids. This 6th century tapestry resonated with that description to me. That's why I show it to you. I think, can we advance one more? Yeah, so this is the 6th century tapestry, which shows nymphs and the abundance of the sea. To understand why a Christian would wear a cloak that associated the exploits of Stilicho's grandson with Aphrodite and the nymphs, I invite you to look at the show of Sabina from Antinopolis in Egypt. Here's the show. Sabina lived and died in the 5th century. Her show is adorned with borders of putti playing in a patty of water lilies. These putti row boats. Can we advance one more, please? Yes, right here, thank you. Swim, hunt ducks with their bare hands, and ride crocodiles. Such scenes of frolicking putti that evoke the abundance of the Nile are known as Nilotic landscapes. On the shoal, they're paired with mythological figures renowned for their beauty and sexual appeal. Next one, please. Bellerophon in the center, the rider of the winged horse Pegasus, Artemis in the top left, the huntress, and his brother, the god Apollo, to the right, and Apollo's love interest, the nymph Daphne. In Ovid's 1st century telling of the story of Apollo and Daphne, Daphne was Apollo's first love. Like Apollo's sister Artemis, Diana, Daphne was a virgin huntress. She roamed the woods hunting wild animals. He loved her dearly, but he offended Eros, the source of all love, by claiming that he was the better archer of the two gods. To revenge the insult, Eros dipped one of his sharp arrows into gold and shot it at Apollo. Another arrow, blunt and made of lead, poisoned Daphne's heart. She was never going to love Apollo, no matter how much he pursued her. The unrequited love story ended with a chase in which Eros himself aided Apollo. Desperate, Daphne called upon her father for help, and he helped her escape by turning her into the laurel tree. Notice how in the panel Daphne flashes a cross in Apollo's face. Danger is averted with the help of the Christian god, who was not present in the original myth. After Daphne's transformation, the distraught Apollo vowed to be bedecked with laurels always. The left and right panels of the show, therefore, are purposefully selected. Artemis reminds us of the similarity between Daphne and the huntress goddess. The arch in Apollo's hands alludes to his prideful boasting, and the cross in Daphne's hand signaled that the weaver and very likely the wearer were both Christians. The ending may not be considered a happy one for our contemporary sensibilities. Nevertheless, this is not how the images invite us to perceive the myth. The bright hues, the Nilotic abundance, the playful little loves all create a merry atmosphere. In the end, the maiden saves her virtue with the help of God, while an old myth gets a Christian reading. The positive associations of these old pagan stories for Christians are likewise attested in epithalamia, or marriage hymns. Dioscorus, who lived in the 6th century in an Egyptian village called Aphrodite, has left us several wedding songs and poems of praise, in which he compares his subjects positively to the very mythological characters we find on textiles. The poet likens the young men to Bellerophon, Heracles, Zeus, and Apollo. Correspondingly, the young women are equal to Daphne, Europa, and other heroines who inflamed the hearts of the immortal gods. Here's what Discourse says about Apollo and Daphne in the marriage song for Matthew. Even revered Apollo has left this thing of sweet darting love, for out of his love for Daphne, Apollo is always known as god of the laurel. Wife, she will not run away from you. Phoebus, that is Apollo, crafted many things, but he was not successful in love. You, on the other hand, I add, will not have to long to wait until you see your dear children on your lap, prettily saying, Daddy, the lovely image of you and your mother. To return to Stylichus' cloak, the puzzling presence of Aphrodite and Eros next to his son's exploits can be taken to indicate the son's eligibility for marriage, for it was Aphrodite who officiated over weddings, as we know from other contemporary literary sources, and I can elaborate on this later. I here compress it for time. Even though Christian, the people who lived in late antiquity still resorted to pagan paradigms to express ideas about beauty, sexual appeal, and marriage. And I have argued that this was so because there were no viable Christian alternatives, either New Testament or Old Testament ones. A religion that its heart privileged the spirit had no place for passionate love affairs. The Songs of Song, the Bible's only sexually suggestive song, was understood always in a mystical sense, as the soul's merging with God. Lack of appropriate Christian models ensured the continued fascination with Dionysus, the god of wine and drunken revelry, and his companions, the dancing Maenads and the wild satyrs with pointy ears and goat legs. They are all shown here on a spectacularly preserved large tapestry from the Abegg collection in Bern. Lac Putti, whose very presence and danger engender agricultural and human fertility, Dionysus and his companions bring merriment, laughter, and release. Wherever Dionysus enters, here he is shown to the left, there's music and dancing. You see here a Maenaid dancing to the accompaniment of a syrinx, a reed instrument played by a Pan, the goat-legged fertility god. It must be noted that in the late antique imaginary of living well, merrymaking goes together with abundance. It cannot happen in poverty or ill health. So too, the realm of Dionysus can be imagined as a lush country villa, suggested here by the arcade, woven as if by a vine heavy with grapes and abundant with flowers. The realms of Eros and Dionysus are further linked through the idea, one more please, yes, that, I quote, wine is love's adornment. In the epithalamium for Count Callinicus and Theophily, his wife, composed by Dioscorus in the year 570, Dioscorus writes, Dionysus attends the summer of your wedding, bearing wine, love's adornment with plenty for all, and blown Demeter, the goddess of agricultural fertility, brings the flower of the field. They have woven holy wreaths around your rose-filled bedroom. In other words, where Dionysus is present, Eros is not far behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I'm so fascinated, and this is the first time that I'm seeing so many of these beautiful textiles, and I have so many questions to start off, and I want to remind our viewers that they're welcome to submit questions through the chat by sending a message to our host. But maybe I can start off with a question, just because I'm so curious, and I'm sure many of our viewers are, with contextualizing where and how and what types of people would be encountering these textiles in their world in contemporary times to them. So where would they be seeing them? What are the types of people who would be wearing them? And what were the conditions that led to their preservation that allow us to see them today?
Thank you, Katie. That is a great question, and thank you for asking it. So there will have been textiles everywhere, on one's body, in the houses, on the streets, on festive occasions. They will be, of course, more luxurious and high quality textiles made of silk in the houses of the wealthy, but even those of more modest means will have clothing on them. And we know that any type of clothing was cared for, that there was a market for second-hand clothes, that clothes were mended. And the reason we have so many of them surviving, especially in Egypt, was because they were used usually as to bury the dead with them, and funerary shrouds. Because those burials occurred above the floodplain of the River Nile, they were spared decay. And so in the 19th century, once the cemeteries were discovered, thereafter began a massive digging, illegal digging, which resulted that many of the pieces were sold to usually wealthy European and North American tourists, and that's how they ended up in European museums. So there are a number of museums in the world that have vast collections of fragments that come from Egypt. But one thing about these textiles is that that doesn't mean that the textile produced in Egypt are idiosyncratic to Egypt. On the contrary, there were textiles also in other parts of the Mediterranean, and their designs were similar because of the shared culture across the Mediterranean in that time.
So we're getting some great questions from the audience about these designs. The first is that the border decorations, this is the asker's phrasing, that the border decorations are so often stylized rope work or nautical designs, and they're wondering, how does sailing craft and boat fittings connect with textile manufacture?
I'm not sure about sailing, but there are two things about that could be said about this. Ropes are kind of an apotropaic symbol, that the importance of ropes and knots have been explored by Henry Maguire, for instance, in his work on textiles. And then the second part of it is that water plays such a huge part in that imaginary of living well, because humans, I think, feel best around water, but also water is life, and that is the source of fertility, of growing. And so even in places that are landlocked, you find this imagery of water and watery abundance.
Would you mind sharing with our audience again the reference you just made to the work related that goes into more detail on this?
Henry Maguire, in the catalog to an exhibition that he and Eunice Maguire organized 2 or 3 decades ago, they wrote about, and right now the title of that book escapes me, something about the earth and the ocean. I have it somewhere here around me. I apologize for not being able to.
That's okay. Maybe that viewer can get in touch afterward with one of us.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
we have another couple of questions that come from two separate viewers, but I'm going to kind of pair them together here because I think they might be able to be answered a little bit in parallel. The first is, were theological Christian notions of love in tension with these pre-Christian notions that you've been discussing? Or perhaps they coexisted or were ambivalent to one another? The other question is, what you make of the juxtaposition of nude pagan figures on materials that clothe the wearers. So these both seem to be getting at kind of the mindset of the people who were producing and experiencing these textiles in relation to their religion and beliefs.
Yes, so first the theological and then the nudity. Okay. The pagan idea of love clashes with the Christian idea of love because, of course, according to the gospel, God is love. God is the source of love. To be a Christian, you have to love God. That is a fundamental Christian principle. Now, how you love God is by opening your heart and believing through loving. But that is too narrow to describe these very human feelings of passion. People continue to get married and to have children, and it is a big deal to get married, to join families. And so there is an ideological kind of conflict, really, between these two competing ideas of love. And you can see how, for instance, ascetic writers and theologians such as Jerome would talk about marriage and asceticism and say virginity is superior to any other state of being. So remaining a virgin throughout your life is superior to being married. Marriage is needed, he says, Jerome, but only because it produces more virgins who can be ascetics. So, in other words, conflicting views existed at the same time, and not all Christians were ascetics. You know, most of them continue to have children, thank goodness, because here we are. Then nudity on the body. You see nude figures everywhere. There was no really, I don't think, any squeamishness about this. And the reason is, if you have to have a recognizable figure from the pantheon of gods or relate a myth meaningfully, you have to follow the iconographic tradition. And the iconographic tradition calls for showing some figures in the nude. For instance, you can't have a recognizable Aphrodite Venus if she were clothed in a dress.
Thank you for those answers. And I think we'll take one more question just in the interest of time. And I also want to thank our viewers here. We have a suggestion from the audience that the title of the book you were referencing before was Earth and Ocean, the Terrestrial World in Early Byzantine Art. Does that sound correct?
Yes, that's
great.
Thank you.
So our last question for this talk today was, is there any influence coming from Iran at this time? So many of the patterns seem similar to early silk fragments from Iran.
Definitely, yes. There is definite influence from the Sasanian Empire. We see this in textiles, we see this in church decorations, in reliefs. So yes, the two societies, the two empires were constantly at war at the same time, constantly interacting. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank our audience so much for contributing these wonderful questions. I want to thank Professor Angelova for that wonderful presentation. And I also wanted to take a moment to thank my colleague, Jessica Moreno, who has been feeding all of your wonderful questions to us and supporting this event in the tech background. And I wanted to just see, Diliana, if you had any kind of last words for our viewers to take with them into the rest of their day?
Well, I just want to thank you, Katie and Jessica, and all of those of you who are attending. I can't see you, but I really appreciate you taking some time in your day to be here with us. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you at some of our upcoming events here at the Hearst Museum. Thank you.